Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope. Nothing said on the Low Carb MD podcast is medical advice. Please consult your own doctor before making any lifestyle changes.
Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. We're talking about something very important. We've talked about type 1 diabetes for several episodes now, and we'll link all the prior episodes we've talked about. We are fierce advocates here on the Low Carb MD podcast of people with type 1 diabetes, well, all spectrums of diabetes, type 1, type 2, and type 1.5. But one of the things I've learned throughout my career about type 1 is how disenfranchised this community is. They are forced to accept 20 years less life expectancy than the average population. Imagine you, your daughter, your son, your loved one was told that they're going to live 20 years less than their sort of the average person. And not only that, they may face amputation, they may face hospitalizations. They're going to have to spend much of their time making minute-to-minute decisions of their blood sugar levels with potentially lethal outcomes. The stress, the anxiety, the fatigue that faces this group, I think, is often really under-recognized. And we've had Dr. Ian Lake, Dr. Andrew Kutnick, Beth McNally, and so many others. Please go back and listen to all those podcasts because it'll round out your education in type 1. And today, we have the opportunity to sort of give back and raise awareness with somebody I met several years ago at our type 1 conference through the SMHP. And her name is Alison Smart, and she is a fierce advocate for people with type 1 diabetes through her not-for-profit, which is the Alliance to Protect Insulin Choice. And certainly she's worked in other advocacy groups, and she, was a welcome addition to the conference several years ago. And I'm excited to hear more from her today. We were talking about why type 1 diabetes is important to her, and I can't wait for you all to hear more about it. So with that said, Alison, it's nice to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much, Tro. Appreciate that. Appreciate that introduction. It's great to be here.
Yeah, maybe what we can do is hit home first, like really hit home. Can you talk to me about the issues that people with type 1 diabetes face right now? Their lives are incredibly challenging, and I think it's tough for people to understand. So can you make it easy for the listener out there to understand what somebody with type 1 goes through every day?
It's just a different way to approach things. So I have a daughter who's 16, and she was diagnosed 3.5 years ago. So she was 13 when she was diagnosed, and you're used to living this life of eating what you want, doing what you want. You go out of town, you don't worry about a lot of extra stuff to take. And it changes things when you get the diagnosis. We go out of town now, and I'm careful to bring quite a bit extra of everything that we need. And there's always this fear, what if all our insulin is in the car and the car gets too hot? Something happens to it. We can't just go to the corner store and get more, which is I think there shouldn't be so many barriers to getting this insulin that we need, because really, my daughter is doing awesome. She's doing pretty much what she would be doing if she didn't have it. She's an athlete, a tennis player. She's had minimal disruption to her frequent tennis playing, partly because of our management. We found an insulin that works perfectly for her. We made some lifestyle changes, and it's a different way of approaching life. But if we have the tools that we need, we can do about anything, but we need those tools. And it's twofold. It's insulin management and lifestyle management.
Well, so you said that your daughter is living just like like she would have otherwise. But I think she has a mom who's a fierce advocate and out there understands sort of your eyes have been opened,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
And besides the type 1 grit group on Facebook, which you all should go visit if you haven't, and the late great Dr. Bernstein's work. I have to, say may his rest in peace. He recently passed away, and what an advocate for the type 1s. we lost a giant, but his legacy will continue on for certain. But,
Mhm.
we are lucky to be in a narrow bubble, right? Where, God forbid, one of my relatives had type 1, they would know, how to manage it, and the potential that's the stability of sort of focusing on lifestyle and its impacts, and focusing on metabolic health and its impacts on type 1. But I'm sure your daughter knows other people with type 1, or other people with type 1 who don't have that. So your daughter's got it. You got a good regimen, you got a good insulin, you got everything in lockdown, but what does the average person go through?
Boy, it's tricky. A lot of we talk about highs and lows, and so what we're referring to is your blood pressure or your blood sugar goes really high, and you get sluggish. It's hard to think. It's dangerous. If it goes high and stays there, you can land up in the hospital. Or if you go too low, you can have a seizure, which is not fun. You don't feel good. It's embarrassing. My daughter, thankfully, has not had either of those. But there are a lot of people who are dealing with those episodes all the time, and it's disruptive to your life, and it's a problem.
Seizures are a problem for sure,
No one
Yeah,
wants to have one.
yeah. And when you first went to an endocrinologist, did you find that it was immediate support? Like, oh, we have the tools for you. All you have to do is lower your carbohydrates. It was published in Pediatrics in 2019. All you need to do is that, focus on carbohydrate reduction. This way you're not giving so much insulin. I mean, was that the first thing you were told?
No, you kind of have to find your own way. And it's a tricky community. There's a lot of you got to be careful what you say. We found our own way, and several months in, figured out some of these changes that have made our lives much easier. Honestly, everything I do is to reduce risk and to make life easier. And yeah, I just think sometimes in life you gotta kind of figure that out on your own, or find like-minded people that will help you.
Look, so you kind of hinted at it, right? But you have to find your own way, and this is a sensitive community, and maybe we can talk about that. So I think it's unfortunate that most people with type 1 have to go to a Facebook group to get real help. I think that's unfortunate. I think that the modern day endocrinologist struggles to be able to really get to those people with type 1 is also unfortunate, right? So I think it's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate that people have to manage themselves on YouTube, right? And but that's also a beauty, right? That we have all of these communities out there. And what I think about what you mean when you say, it's a tricky community. Well, it is a bit of a tricky community. It is, having type 1 is very expensive, right? Not everybody can afford a pump. Not everybody wants a pump. Not everybody can afford insulin, right? And not only that, there's a lot of minute to minute decisions that have to go, and there's a huge emotional and mental health impact of having to make minute to minute decisions on your blood sugar levels. So when you go in and you just tell somebody, oh, you have to lower your carbohydrates, that's the only way. I mean, you're going to face a bit of oppositional defiance and stubbornness. Like, don't take that away from me. So I think, when you say it's a difficult community, are you thinking sort of about equity and accessibility to treatments? And are you thinking also about sort of, those food rules that are hardly pushed, and not everybody wants to accept those food rules. Some people want to rebel against those food rules, and they want to have their cupcake and their insulin too. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely, all of the above. Of course, after you've had this for a while, you try things and you see what happens, and hopefully you're a quick learner and you realize that you can make some changes that will help things be a lot better. But yeah, and also, there are people you can find for coaching, which to me was huge in the beginning. I hired a few people to help me on a day-by-day basis when we figured out how we wanted to manage this. And so there are resources out there, but it's expensive. I mean, it's just layer, as you mentioned, the insulin's expensive, the devices, the monitoring devices, some of the help you get can be, but there's resources out there if you look. And we're so grateful for the many resources. And actually, we've had really good experience with our endocrinologists also. We've had several since the beginning, and we're really happy with them too.
Yeah, you said several since the beginning. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think sometimes you do need to kind of it's about finding your own way. We were grateful for the instruction we received, but then we needed to make a couple changes. So we went to someone else, and then we wanted to make some changes again. And it's not necessarily a bad and good thing. And I'm grateful our endocrinologists have supported us in this recent effort that we'll get into about Levemir, and I'm grateful for their support, their realization that this is a huge issue for us and for many others in this community.
Well, so let's talk about the typical treatments, right? Usually when you get initially diagnosed, you may not need that much insulin. You may just dose with some meals, maybe a little bit of long-acting insulin to sort of keep it stable. But you start to become very vigilant with tracking the blood sugar, maybe with a CGM, maybe with frequent finger sticks. Again, we want to be sensitive to accessibility. Maybe not everybody can get that CGM or have access to it or can pay for it. But then as the sort of the disease, and there are some antibodies now that have shown that can delay the sort of need for insulin by a couple of years in some cases. And certainly I've seen low carb diets allow for years long of honeymoon. I think the longest I've seen was 10 years of honeymooning. But quickly, people need more and more insulin. And in this country, 60% of people with type 1 will end up on a pump, right? And usually it's an ultra rapid acting insulin that's in that pump. And if not, they're on a long acting regimen plus a dose of insulin before eating with some carb counting, and then a correction dose after eating. So it could be up to 6 injections or 7 injections in a day. But when you're low carb, right, when you're not eating carbohydrates, the need for those rapid acting insulins disappear, or not disappear, but maybe not so important. So can you talk about this when you change your diet and you eat predominantly protein and fat? Maybe you don't need the more modern, ultra fast acting insulins. And can you talk about why, the other insulins may be a better fit?
Sure. So actually, we eat predominantly protein and vegetables, but we eat fabulous. I mean, anyone that's come to eat at my house now says, my family says, you were a good cook before, but you're incredible now. We eat tacos, but we eat the shell out of cheese, and we eat pizza, but we are careful with the crust, and we eat root beer floats. But so teenagers need the most insulin they'll need in their entire life. And my daughter still needs a fair amount of rapid acting insulin and still frequent injections. We just can't take that away, even with the lifestyle modifications. And there are so many in our community that need this specific insulin, this Levemir. And I know we'll get into that more later, but I wanted to address one thing you said, that there's some trial and error involved and in how much insulin people need. And as far as a basal insulin, if there's trial and error, do you want one that's a shorter acting insulin that's more flexible, or a longer acting insulin that's more unforgiving? And this is the one that's great. I mean, I have a friend who is she uses an insulin pump, but she needs frequent MRI scans, and you have to take off your pump for those. And she wants Levemir because it's this shorter, one injection lasts 8 to 14 hours. The alternative lasts 20 or 42 hours, and it's so much easier. And then the other thing you mentioned, that 60% will end up in a pump, that we've really researched those statistics. There was a presentation by Insulet last year, who makes the Omnipod, and they said it was 40% in the US and 20% worldwide that use an insulin pump. And there are a lot of people in our community who have used a pump for a while, and now they don't want to use one for a while. There are a lot of reasons that that people want to come off. So we can't think the future is that everyone will always use an insulin pump. We just can't get rid of this option of good long-acting insulin alternatives.
I think the reason for the pump is largely because of our health system. You're absolutely right. Worldwide, the use of the pumps is very low. You quoted half. I've seen as low as a third of what we use. But I think our food is so bad in this country. I'd be honest. If I was eating a modern diet, I don't think I could handle it. Knowing what I know about glycemia, I couldn't handle the minute-to-minute decisions. Like I would need a pump. If I was eating modern food, I and with all the issues that it comes with, which certainly you may know better than I do, um, the locations, the tubing, gosh, so many things that could go wrong with the pump. But um, it's I don't know. I think injecting with the modern diet is just insane. It's hard. It's really difficult. But I think when you have such great, glycemic control, like that was shown in the pediatric study, that was the most shared study in 2019, coming from the type 1 grit group and the work of Dr. Bernstein, then you have a chance of really attaining great glycemic control with, maybe, the good old fashioned way. So can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure.
Do you think my comments are off?
No, they're not, but I am careful to not diminish the great good pumps have done for a lot of people. People love them. And also back to whatever your diet is, there are some people that are able to figure out dosing with certain foods. Again, for us, it's just come down to safety and ease. We try to eliminate as many of the variables as we can. And I think for someone like my daughter who's going to need insulin for the next 80 years, I think there will be periods of her life where she'll want an insulin pump and part where she won't. And I think most are like that. I could give you so many examples of, we have kids who just hated the pump change days. And so they run away. And then when it's time for just an injection, it doesn't phase them. People think a shot is terrible. And when you have type 1 diabetes, shots mean life. I mean, it's just not, they're tiny needles. It becomes a way of life. So, and again, a big part of my basis is I don't want to take any method of insulin delivery away from anyone. I think pumps are fabulous. We need several different kinds, and we need several kinds of insulin to stay available. When you look at what's happened in the pharmaceutical industry, a lot of the bad can be seen when you look at people who need insulin. We should live in a world today where we can go to the store or fill out an online form, easily have a choice of several insulins or insulin pumps, and easily get that. I shouldn't be terrified when I go on a trip if something happens to my supplies. I should be able to go to the store and get it. It shouldn't be what my insurance covers or, what my physician thinks I should have. We live this on a daily basis. We are making dosage changes on the fly. If I did what it said to do on the box of insulin, that would be so dangerous because we're slowly adjusting the amount all the time. And I don't know if that fully answered your question, but
No, I mean it's absolutely right. The amount of calls I've gotten, the worry and the panic in my patient's voice when they're traveling, like I need a month's supply, it's going to cost me this amount. The DME won't pay for it, and DMEs are atrocious to deal with. For the large part, they send out a certain amount, they hold it hostage if you don't pay. I mean, it is like being a type 1 patient is like being assaulted by everybody at the same time. Doctors, pharmaceutical companies, government, interventions or lack of interventions, affordability, financially, the mental health of having to make all these decisions. It's terrible. And it's challenging. It's not simple. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, I think us doctors, one of the things I took away from the Boca conference from 2023 was that or yeah, 2023 was
2024, last year.
2024. Yeah, was and this is part of the reason why we did the guidelines, but it's, and if you haven't read those guidelines, Jack put in the show notes, the SMHP made guidelines for type 1 diabetes to support sort of metabolic interventions. But it's oftentimes the patient knows more than the doctor, right? And the medical teams. They just know more because they're living it day in and day out. They know they have an infection before their doctor does. Their blood sugar starts to rise up. They know, they feel something is off. They know their blood sugar is coming down. They just know, right? They know because they live it every day. Anything that could go wrong with the syringe, they know because they're doing 5 to 10 injections a day, right? All these little things, like they know better, and they know a lot. Have you found it difficult to interact with sort of the medical community and the doctors, like through your daughter in the last 3 or 4 years? Like, do you find it difficult in sort of being an advocate for your daughter?
For her, we've been really lucky. We've had fabulous professionals that are physicians that we've gone to. But I've interacted a lot with physicians since I started this journey advocating for Levemir. So I've been doing this it's been about a year and a half since the announcement was given that this insulin would be removed from the market. And I interact with physicians a lot. I went to the American Diabetes Association scientific sessions last year in Orlando, and I spent the weekend with listening to the classes and hanging out with the physicians that specialize in diabetes and pregnancy, because this is a real reason why Levemir needs to stay around. And they explained, we went to dinner and they explained how it is from their point of view. And even since then, I've tried to talk to other physicians and I've gotten the word back. Look, we have to be so careful of what we say. We're always under threat of litigation. And, if I'm, maybe Levemir is the most proven best insulin for someone who's pregnant, but if I say that publicly, and the only insulin I have available is Glargine or Tresiba for my patients, what is that going to make them think, and what will that make me think? And even I have statements from many physicians. We put them on our website, but we had to remove their name because the organizations aren't speaking out in favor of getting a biosimilar of Levemir to the market, but the individual physicians, those that specialize in many who specialize in diabetes and pregnancy, are saying this is huge. It will be dire for pregnancy outcomes if we don't have this flexible insulin that's well proven in pregnancy. So when you say, is it hard to talk to physicians? Well, I'm grateful for the ones that have helped us, but I have sympathy too, realizing they have to be so careful with what they say. And so I'm extra grateful that they've given us the statements they have that says this is essential to fix this.
Can you tell us some of the qualities of, so tell us maybe a little bit about the not-for-profit, its purpose, what do you want, what you're trying to accomplish, and then maybe tell us why Levemir is so important.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So a year and a half ago, November 8th, 2023, Novo Nordisk made an announcement. We're going to remove Levemir by the end of 2024 from the US market. And our nonprofit started a few months later. We just started networking, talking to people. I went to that Boca conference that we were at, and that was my first time I was able to speak about that. I was so grateful to Doug Reynolds and the organizers because I just knew there would be people there who would realize this is a problem and would help. And we've networked with other people, we called our organization the Alliance to Protect Insulin Choice. And our whole premise is we need access to this specific insulin. We want a biosimilar. We want a generic. Is that so hard to ask? That of this insulin that's been widely available in the United States for 20 years, we want a generic. It's still available worldwide and will be at least till the end of 2026. And so we want continued access until then, and we want a generic. And in a little bit, I'll kind of tell you some of the gains that we've made some real progress. But your next question was, why is Levemir unique? And this is the one I really want to hit on the most. There are 5 reasons. First and foremost, Levemir is flexible. It's a nimble insulin that you can change. As we mentioned, if picture a scenario, you have a new little 2-year-old who's diagnosed and you don't know exactly how much insulin she'll need. Do you want one that you can give an amount and that you can change it, in 8 to 14 hours? Or do you want a longer acting one where you're a little more stuck? So that's huge. That's why athletes love it. That's one of the reasons it's preferred for pregnancy, because women who are pregnant have insulin needs that change throughout their pregnancy. And it's easy to be able to keep up with this shorter acting insulin. So number one is its flexibility. Number two is that it's preferred for pregnancy. Levemir was available before glargine. And then I just need to tell you, so the 3 basal insulins, I refer to 2 of them by their brand name and 1 of them by their generic name. And sometimes that confuses people, but it's because only 1 of the 3 is available as generics, as biosimilars. It's what they're called. So I refer to them as Levemir and Tresiba are the 2 made only by Novo Nordisk. And then the third is glargine, and it comes by several different names. Lantus is the most common name. It also comes by the name of Semglee, Basaglar, Resvaglar. Tuheo is an extra strength. So when we compare the 3, those are your options. And people think insulin is insulin. They don't realize these differences. So number 1 is the flexibility. Number 2, it's preferred in pregnancy. It was the only one approved by the FDA for pregnancy of the 3. Even though the others are used, this one is preferred for many reasons. And number 3, it's the only one you can dilute. So little tiny children sometimes need tiny amounts of insulin. We have children who are 9 months old who, if they don't give this long-acting insulin through the night, their blood sugar goes high, but maybe they give a half unit. And if you can imagine eyeballing a half unit on a syringe, and sometimes that half unit is too much. So if you can dilute that, you can give a little bit larger amount and have it be really precise. And this is the only one. You cannot dilute the other 2. And then number 4, this one has well proven to lead to less weight gain than the 2 alternatives. And number 5, Levemir doesn't hurt. It has a pH of 7, which is neutral. So does Tresiba, but glargine has a pH of 4. It has to be acidic for its mechanism of action. So glargine, it crystallizes when it's injected, and if you inject it into the bloodstream, this is actually another big reason of the 5, that it can produce a hypoglycemic event that you didn't expect. So if you inject glargine, usually it's fine and it will act the way you want it to, but it has a inferior coefficient of variation. I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, but glargine is just not as predictable. And again, I'm not trying to badmouth any type of insulin. We need them all. But the people that prefer Levemir, several say, I had several frightening events, hypoglycemic events from glargine, and I don't have that with Levemir in that same extent. And that's another reason why it's important. So those are kind of the summary of the reasons this one's really important to get a biosimilar of.
So why do you think that the pharmaceutical companies like, well, we see you all need this and we're making some money with it, but screw it. You can't get it. Why would they do this?
So you look at the history of insulin, it's multifaceted, but you look at the history of insulin, and this has happened over and over. As an insulin is going off patent, it is discontinued from the market in favor of still patent protected insulins. So we saw this with animal insulin. There were some great insulins in the early 2000s called the Lenti series, Ultra Lenti, Semi Lenti. They disappeared in favor of these newer ones. And people think the newer ones are always better, and that's just not the case. There were people we should have a world today where we could go to the store and try out the different kinds. So many people don't understand the differences. And there's more reasons. And today it's actually interesting. It's different because there are 3 major insulin manufacturers, and 2 of them are now focusing on weight loss drugs. In fact, Novo Nordisk doesn't really think of themselves as an insulin manufacturer anymore. They're publicly saying we're a weight loss drug company. They make Ozempic and Wegovy, and you can make much more money from those insulins. They actually said publicly, there was a Senate hearing in September where the CEO said, we will if a company comes forward that wants to make this, we will cooperate. And that just hasn't happened. I mean, I can get a little into what's happened now. We have a company who's come forward who wants to make this insulin, and they've actually reverse engineered it. They know how to make it. So now the problem is just getting it to the market. But they're not getting the promised help that Novo Nordisk said they would give. And if they could get that help, this would be seamless. You can transfer the FDA rights to manufacture a drug. They could do that. They could license it. We're not asking for this for free. You could license it and make a profit. And a little bit more into that, we know of 6 companies coming to the market, bringing biosimilars of insulin to the market. So I do see a day where insulin is not predominantly made by just 3 manufacturers, but all of these companies coming to the market. Of the long-acting insulins, the only one they're working on is Glargine, not the other 2, not Levemir and not Tresiba. So we're heading, if something doesn't change, we're heading to a world where people have this only one option, which is really frightening because there are some people who cannot tolerate one. And, I like to compare it to pain medicine. People understand that acetaminophen works differently than, ibuprofen and aspirin. And if everyone said, look, we're getting rid of some of them, everyone can now have aspirin, you'll be fine, there would be an uproar, because people would say, no, I can't tolerate this one. I need the other one. And it's the same thing with insulin. And we wish that we were being heard more.
So, you made it clear, and I also wonder, the other, if there's any data regarding sort of auto insulin antibodies. People don't realize that when we inject something, your body can create an immune response to it. And I've seen worsening insulin resistance from these increasing antibodies. So a lot of times, maybe I'll switch somebody from one insulin to the other when we see these high levels of auto insulin antibodies. So it's important to have that variety, I think, for a number of reasons. So it sounds like this is a sort of there's not significant enough money in it for the pharmaceutical companies to be interested. And I can't see a reason for them to even say, well, maybe they want to sort of force people into the newer branded insulins. Is that like
That's for sure part of it. So, I mean, just think if you're Novo Nordisk, and you can make a whole lot more money off of weight loss drugs. That's part of it. But also they are bringing one new insulin to the market. It's a once a week basal insulin. The main group that they will market this to is type 2 diabetics. A once a week basal insulin would be really frightening for most type 1s. But again, I'm not trying to, there may be a few out there who could do that. I just try and bring home the point that people have insulin needs that change. Again, it's the typical groups have changing needs. Are athletes, your insulin needs change quite a lot with your athletic activity. Women with a menstrual cycle, hormones change and your insulin needs change. Pregnancy. But if you're an adult or a woman past menopause or an adult man and you're fairly sedentary, you might have insulin needs that don't change a lot. So maybe that would be more of a group that wouldn't mind the longer acting insulins. Let's see, I think I might have gotten away from your question. What was the last question?
No, I mean, it's just like the incentives, right? So, it's interesting when Banting gave away the license, you would have thought there would have been some sort of like concept of can we serve, this community who really needs it? And it just sounds like, that idea is just gone. It's gone. It's, and I look at the pharmaceutical companies, I look at the DMEs, I look at the doctors and the endocrinologists out there, and even the food companies. Like the food companies that are like, oh, no added sugar. And then you look on the back, it's like 40 grams of carbohydrates, right? And it's just a predatory environment. And my heart goes out to this community. And the work you're doing, I think, is, we need more advocacy, I think. And there's great groups. Let Me Be 83 is a great group. Your group, Fighting for Levemir. I think it's inspiring, and I hope the listener out here can share in that inspiration.
I have something I wanted to say as far as that goes. So this company, they're called RBio, that wants to make this insulin that's already reverse engineered it. They have manufacturing in place. It looks like they might be getting the funding that they need. We're hopeful. So I really feel like we're getting things, the pieces of the puzzle. In the beginning, we were like, okay, we need a manufacturer, we need funding, we need help with the FDA. The pieces are starting to fit in place. The company is moving forward. It looks like the funding will be in place. We need help with the FDA still. But back to your question of money, we're not as small a group as people think. So there are currently close to 10 million in the US who use insulin, long-acting insulin. In 2021, it was 6 million. So of course that represents those with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and don't forget gestational diabetes. So even women with gestational diabetes, so 10% of all pregnancies are diagnosed as gestational diabetes. Of those, 40% require insulin. The vast majority will only need insulin for that pregnancy, and then they'll be through. So to think that we're this small group, I mean, is the future of our pregnant women and these children, is that important, and realizing that this is the insulin most approved, most proven for pregnancy, and the one that can handle the frequent fluctuations in insulin need. Why are we not paying more attention to that? I would think that would be huge. And just the fact that, I mean, it's a big market. The Levemir market alone was $650 million just a few years ago, and in 2019, it's hard to get the statistics, but it was over $1 billion market. It's not like this isn't a lucrative market, because it absolutely is.
Yeah, I think the problem becomes incentives, right? So there's more to be made with Tresiba, right? And I use Tresiba. There's more to be made with these newer patented agents than there is, and that's the whole chain is making money off of that, right? The manufacturer, the PBMs, the pharmacies, everybody makes more than the medical insurance companies. So good on you for advocating for this. It's a very niche sort of thing, but I'd imagine if I, had a type 1 kid who was soon to be pregnant, in the next 10 or 20 years, right? I would be as fiercely uh, as fierce as an advocate as you. Is there anything the listener can do to help support? Like, so somebody out there is listening to this, right? And they're like, this is important, right? I get it. I get it. They've bought in. They understand from what you've said, this group needs help. They understand the importance of this. What can they do? What can somebody who's just listening do? Most of us, many of us, I would say, that listen to this podcast may view pharmaceuticals as adversaries, but it's not in every case, right? Every type 1 patient needs pharma, right? So they're not always adversaries. I think the doctors should be adversaries if they're over prescribing or under prescribing or not, right? So what can the average person listening to this do? And what should they do?
Yeah, there's several things that they can do, and then I want to address a couple things you said. In fact, let me go address a couple things you said, and then I'll get back to that. You said it's a niche market. That's one of the things I like to speak again. So just a few years ago, there were 1 million people in the US using Levemir. It was the 117th most commonly prescribed drug in 2021, and it was starting to be pushed from the market even then. In 2022, it was still the 127th most prescribed drug in the United States. That's not niche, people think it is. And certainly some of those could use other types of insulins, but there are some who absolutely need this specific type. And then the next thing you mentioned, trying to think, what was it? I can't remember. But back to what could people do? You can reach out to your legislators. We need help with them. We still could really use some help with funding. And, it's tricky. That's been the big question. How can we fix this? We need more awareness. There is an awareness on Capitol Hill. I go every month or two. I'm going actually next week to talk to Senate offices and congressional offices. And there's awareness that this needs to be fixed. They think it's too hard. And at its very root, why is this too hard? This is arguably the safest insulin. It's been around for 20 years. This company knows how to make it. We should be able to get there. I want to address, one thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned. Right. I'm so grateful for what Novo Nordisk has done in developing this insulin. Their story is amazing. So 100 years ago, when Frederick Banting and his helpers made insulin in Canada, that same year, 2022, there was a couple, August and Marie Crow in Denmark, and they heard about this. And they were both brilliant scientists and physicians. Marie had just been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and they came over. They said, "Can we come?" And those innovators in Canada said, "Come, stay in our homes, learn what we do, take it back to Scandinavia." And they did. They took it back and they improved it. And they gave us this amazing insulin. We're just saying, look, we appreciate what you've done. Come on, help us out with a handover, to another manufacturer who can make this. So back to how you can help. It's increased awareness, talking to your legislators, and funding will help. This company does need investors that's making it. And our organization is just doing, with our own funds, with not many donated funds. We've had a little bit, but not much. Trying to think what else. Did I miss anything?
You got everything. And if we'll put everything in the show notes so somebody who's listening can help this. It's an important cause. I'm just curious, how do you eat and how does your daughter eat?
We eat awesome. And we get more enjoyment out of food now than we used to, we eat predominantly whole foods we eat food that a lot of vegetables, we eat a lot of protein, we eat, we have great meals. I love entertaining, and I've just learned food is life, and if you eat food that helps that, it's awesome, and we're doing great.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So a lot of meat, fish, chicken, eggs, Greek yogurt. I mean,
All the above, yeah.
all the above. Got it. How do you handle dessert and pizza, and how do you handle all that?
We actually have a fair amount of dessert. By the way, your wife makes really good the rosettes mix. We just had some of her sugar cookies, the no sugar cookies, but they're great. And we have, we regularly we use almond flour, and we use alternatives to sugar that are easy to dose for. I love that our way of eating, we're not specifically saying, okay, eat this amount and dose for it. She eats what she wants, and we have a typical, because of the food we eat, it's easy to dose for. So yeah. We're doing great.
So you try to make the glycemic burden less, right? I mean, you're trying to lower carbs, you're trying to, and still come up with ways to include food that is enjoyable. As you said, food is life.
Food is very enjoyable for us. Yeah, we love it. It's great. We're doing great.
Thank you so much for coming, Alison. Thank you for what you do. I know that this is, it's an uphill battle, but it sounds like you guys are making some huge wins, and keep doing it in any way we can support you. If you're out there thinking you have a family member with type 1, and gosh, send them this podcast and send them towards Alison to help. And I appreciate everything you do, Alison.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Appreciate this, Tro.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon by going to lowcarbmd.com.